Chances are you are a high achieving, successful woman, and you've had a love hate relationship with your body for as long as you can remember. If you've ever wished you could be totally content with your body, your weight, and finally break up with the scale, today's conversation is for you. I am honored to welcome Steph Gaudreau to the podcast. Steph creates solutions for athletic women over 40 to fuel themselves better, get stronger, increase their energy, and perform better in and out of the gym. She's a sports nutritionist, lifting coach, author, and longtime podcaster. She believes that strength is a catalyst for a more expansive life. Are you a high achieving woman ready to break up with the scale? Listen up because this episode is for you. So I've got Steph Gaudreau here with me today, and I am so excited to have Steph here. Welcome, Steph, first of all. It's so nice to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, I feel like the tables are flipped a little bit, and I'm going to just share a little bit of my experience with Steph and how it came to be that she's here on School of Self-Worth. So last year, so I've been like a long time kind of reader of Steph when she used to do food blogging, and then last year I was like, it's one of those things where I was like, well, I really want to get to know her. So I started following you on Instagram and I'd comment on things. And then eventually, I had been listening to her podcast and I wanted to talk about my book on her podcast. So it worked out that I ended up sharing about 24 ways to move more on your podcast last year, which was so much fun. And then this year, I've hired her to be my nutrition coach as well, because what she shares is so relevant to women who are over 40 and really looking to fuel their strength. So that's my perspective on how Steph arrived here at School of Self Worth. And I'm just excited to have you here because the framework of what you share is really around, women being strong, feeding themselves well, and really turning what I consider to be a lot of like cultural norms around food and nutrition on their head. And so I'm really excited you're here to talk about that because I like it in the context also of self worth, that we are worth like fueling ourselves well and eating well.
hmm
So, in the context of all of those pieces of you being here today, Steph, I'm curious for you if we could even start with that question around where does worthiness come into play? Like being a nutrition coach and a fitness coach, where do you see it come into play? And how do you think about it, even for yourself in your own journey? Because you have this long, expansive journey as an athlete, in nutrition and fitness.
Oh, this is such a good question. I think for me personally, it's been really interesting over the years to see how and in what ways I my self-worth along the way has been very tied to athletic performance. And for a subset of those years to how I looked in the context of athletic performance in terms of how I physically, showed up in my sport and some of the sports that I did, putting a very high price on things like smallness, if we, for lack of a better term. So just be as small as possible. And it's been a very interesting transition along the way to, first of all, be able to separate, um, or I guess be able to distinguish between Steph as an athlete, as an athletic person, um, and my self worth. And also saying, like, for example, if I don't win this competition, I still have inherent self worth, right? It doesn't like my worth is not tied to how I perform. And for many years, those two things were very intermarried. And also being an athlete has been in many years of my life, one of the things I derive self worth from. So it's been very tricky over the years to sort of distinguish between, Steph as a person versus Steph as an athlete. I am not just an athlete, I am more than an athlete. As myself as a competitive person who wants to and likes to challenge myself. And yet over the years to see how that's kind of come back to bite me and how myself my feeling of self-worth has been very tied to, like, for example, just how I would place in a race or how I would place in a competition. If I was lifting, did I bomb out of my lifting competition or did I make it? And I don't know if it's partly wisdom and age or just participating for the last 6 years also in a sport where I really haven't competed, and sometimes, I think that's been very purposeful on my part to be able to separate my athletic self from even my competitive athlete self. So there's that. And then I think, in terms of just the work that I do, I see a lot of women who feel like they're not worthy of getting support in terms of the goals that they have with their nutrition or with their training. And a lot, I mean, I can't even pretend to understand every single nuance and how the systems that we've grown up with and how um, the identities that we have shape and form those sorts of things, even just as women identifying people. How does that impact us? And yet it's one of the things that consistently I see over and over again is women who come across my work, or they're like, oh, I'm just like, I think this is something that I really could benefit from, but like there are all these other things in my life that have to come first, or I feel like I just I'm not good enough of an athlete to invest in this kind of support, or I'm not I just don't deserve it. And that's really hard to watch. It's really hard to watch because I'm forever that champion of other women and seeing the greatness in them. And it's really hard. So I love that question. I don't think I have every answer, but I think those would be kind of the two biggest things that come up.
Well, let's start with both the athletic performance side, and then I'd love to talk about the look side because I feel like that's a very deep,
Oh,
complex question for women in general, right?
yeah.
But what you're saying about athletic performance, because I feel that way too. Like if I don't feel strong, and
Hmm.
many of you know, like I wrote a fitness column for many years, and so I am somebody who cares very much about my own strength. And then I've
Hmm.
had times where I have injuries, and then during those times, it's actually can be tough. I'm like, all I can do today is walk or
Hmm.
stretch a little bit. And how did you go from someone who was, because you competed at a pretty high level in athletics
Hmm.
and then continue to lift and be really strong? Like, how did you start to piece out for yourself the separation between your accomplishments and
Mm.
then being Steph?
I think a lot of it has been the school of hard knocks and the the fact that if you're an athletic person, you can't, I mean, universe willing, we don't wish for anyone to get injured, for example. But if you've been in athletics your entire life, since the age of 7, and you're in your mid 40s, speaking about myself, you're eventually going to get an injury, something's going to happen, and you're going to have to face some of that. And I think for a lot of athletic individuals, myself included, being really good at their sport, or being somebody who's always been able to prove other people wrong, or just however, athletics has shown up in that way for you. I feel like when the school of hard knocks comes along, and yes, you do have that injury that really kind of takes you out for the first time, or you really have to kind of reckon with and grapple with, who am I outside of this thing? And if this part of my life were to go away forever, because I do know people that's happened to, unfortunately. And if that did happen to me, who would I be without this thing? Or how else could I sort of live into my values if I weren't able to do it in this exact way? So, for example, I'm someone who values continued growth and learning. Like, if I couldn't do that in an athletic capacity, how else could I do that in my life? And I've really had those moments, particularly in terms of injury and things like that, where I've had to sit back and kind of grapple with that stuff. And it's not easy. It is not easy, but it is worth, I think, going through those mental exercises with yourself before it ever happens. If it's not happened to you yet, is like still kind of pondering on these questions or talking it out with somebody else, how you identify with and connect with your inherent self-worth. And then, on the piece of like how you look, that's really complicated. And body image and just lived experience, it comes into play hugely here for me an endurance athlete, primarily before I transitioned into the world of lifting weights. My sort of self-worth was really wrapped up in how thin I could be. Because again, the thinner I could be, in theory, the better at my sport I could be. And because I placed such a high precedence on that as a determinant of my self-worth, I really had to just sort of shut it down and walk away from that for a while. And I basically went, into lifting weights, and it was such a relief. It was such a breath of fresh air. I felt so much freedom. And also it was great because it was like, let's get strong and, like let's have muscles. And that was really cool. But for me, that gave me sort of a gap, I guess, to feel like, oh, well, there's more to, self-worth is inherent, but I had to have that sort of time away from this pursuit that I was doing that was so heavily in lockstep with looking a specific way or being a specific weight or showing up as small as you possibly could to be a better athlete. Not just for the sake of beauty standards or body standards, but to be a good athlete is like just be as thin as you can be. That like I needed that buffer. And strength training happened to come to my life at a time where I got that gap. I felt like I could exhale. I felt like I had that freedom. And then from there, it was like, yeah, being strong is cool and improving these skills is cool. And like focusing on what I can do is cool. And that was like a stepping stone, I feel like, to this feeling like, yes, I actually have an acknowledgement. I have inherent self worth. It's not even just in what I can do. And it's certainly not just in how I look.
I have so many questions for you. So this is perfect. If you don't listen to Steph's podcast, by the way, if you're a lifter and care about your nutrition and performance, like definitely go check it out. But first, I actually wanted to go back to the performance piece.
Mhm.
And I loved how you said, over time, injury and School of Hard Knocks, you figured out how to separate that out.
Mm.
And I'm curious then now, and at the same time, you still achieve, like, I make sure I want to get this right. You just got your brown belt, right, in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah, and so how do you reconcile that? Because there's a lot of really ambitious women who are listening, and how do you find
Mm.
that balance of, who I'm not the things I do, I'm not, my athletic accomplishments, my accomplishments in general, and yet I get to pursue things. Like, how do you
Mhm.
balance that for yourself?
Yeah, it's really hard. Um, I feel like so again, taking Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as an example, this is one sport. So I've been doing it for 6 years. I did just earn my brown belt, which is one step below a black belt. Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is largely considered to be one of the hardest martial arts systems to learn. It takes a long time to achieve a black belt. Um, I made a really deliberate decision pretty early on that I did not want to put pressure on myself to compete. And I think that was immensely helpful for me. Now, I'm not saying that if you decide to keep competing in a sport or you want to compete in a sport that you're automatically going to have a hard time with this. But for me, again, it was almost this way of like buying myself some space. And it is so hard because in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and our particular academy and like tradition that I train under, we do stripes on our belts. So it's like, gotta, um, I'm a very much a person who likes to have that concrete feedback, that concrete knowledge of here's how I'm doing is, the number of stripes. I know if I'm going up a stripe, like that means I've hit some kind of I'm progressing. I've hit some kind of a milestone, for example. And at the same time, I've also had experiences where I've really had to force myself to mentally kind of distance myself from the stripes or from the belt progression as a way to be the only indicator of progress. And I've really, I think leaning on other people who understand the pursuits that you do can help you have perspective, especially people who have been through, they've come out the other side, if you will. But, as I heard from a coach one time, new level, new devil. So you sort of like your problems just evolve and they get a little bit different over time. But I also think like looking for less tangible ways of progress has been helpful as well. So, for example, I coach little kids now in BJJ, which is they're 4 to 6 years old, right? They're so like learning how to teach them has been one example of my own reflection of, I guess, my own progress in my own growth in the sport. So I think, looking for the intangibles is really, really important, or looking for the things that are less tangible or less discrete than, say, a stripe or your place on the leaderboard or, hitting a PR, because you're not going to hit a PR every single day. So does that mean you're not improving? And that's been really I don't think I set out with that in mind, other than the sort of conscious decision to give myself a break from competing for the first time in my life. I just didn't want the pressure, and the pressure was really coming from myself. But I think looking for those less tangible things that are indicators of your growth, of your skill, of your progress, of your deepening wisdom in that particular thing,
Mhm.
whatever your athletic pursuit is, and not just chasing the podiums, not just chasing PRs. Like, you have to look for the little things. You have to look for the small, almost boring stuff to say, I am making progress, but I'm not so tied to that next stripe, for example, that I get, for example, frustrated and I decide I'm not gonna train. So I don't know if that answered your question, but those are the things that came to mind as ways to stay grounded, I guess I would say. Like, I think it's fine to have those athletic goals, those ambitions, those ways you want to challenge yourself, the things you want to achieve, but you have got to stay grounded in the process. You have got to remind yourself why it matters to your life other than just winning, because there's going to be times when you don't win if you're competing, or you're it's taking much longer to achieve those goals. And you have got to recategorize it in your brain and think, well, why am I doing this?
I
And I
love
think
what
that
you're
helps.
saying. Well, it's such a growth curve, right? Because I used to think that like I was yoga for a long time. So I
Mhm.
was like, oh, I'm not competitive anymore. I thought I had trained it out of myself. And then I joined a gym where they like always ranked us, and it unleashed this like insane competitive streak for a while. And then of course when I got injured, I had to like
Mhm.
rescale myself and look at it. So I love what you're sharing because it is, I think, a whole journey in balance, because now you're in a system that's very direct, like go get a black belt, right? And so how
Mhm.
do you, I feel like for myself, I would be like, all right, here we go. And then I would want to dive into that. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, again, find like, okay, but life happens or things happen. There's things you want to do or injuries that happen, and you can't
Mhm.
gun 100% all the time for things.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
there are gonna be times where you feel like you're regressing. I'm positive, and I mean, I've not done every sport in the world. You've done more things than I have. Let's just say that much. But I could be fairly certain that no matter what athletic pursuit you do, there are going to be periods of regression, or periods where you feel like nothing's happening.
Mm.
And it's those moments where I feel like, even personally for me, blue belt, and I was going with BJJ and examples here, but blue belt is notoriously a time when people quit because it's a long haul. It's hard. You kind of get over the elation that you're away from you're like, I got away from my white belt. Like, finally I'm in my first like real colored belt. And there is a reason why people call it blue belt blues. It's just a really hard time. Those are the times where you have to lean back on other stuff. Like I said, the reason why you're doing this, or just showing up and thinking, even if I don't progress today in terms of my gameplay or my skill level, or I beat that other person or whatever it is, it's like I just showed up and did a workout. Like, go me.
Mm. Hmm.
And it really is a game of, just like a lot of other kinds of training, Olympic weightlifting too. You have days where you're just throwing snatches behind your head, or dropping, you just can't get the jerk or whatever it is, and you just think, you know what, I'm just going to get through this session, and like, it's okay. It isn't I don't have to win training. I don't have to win every workout.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of that just comes with experience, and maybe, again, the wisdom of aging. I don't know, but I feel like some perspective in those cases can be really helpful.
Yes, and I love what you're sharing around. I think that for me in general, like athletic pursuits are such a good analogy and metaphor for a lot of like what are the women who are listening, because they might apply it to work or career, like what are they doing in their lives? But it's all the same, it's like whatever you do one way is everywhere. And that's why I always laugh at
Mm.
myself in the gym, because I'm like, okay, like this is a place where you get to practice everything you're teaching and coaching.
Yeah.
Which brings me to the next part, which we were talking about body image, and I want to come back to that because I feel like, I know for myself, like continued practice and a
Hmm.
continued thing. And one thing that really resonated for me is when you talked about when you no longer had a relationship with the scale that was negative, and even really actually, I think, broke up with it. I think was your podcast on it. And if you could talk more about that, because I think for so many women, like it's like, oh, we're taught by literally every corner of the internet and family and culture that how you look matters. Like your
Hmm.
worthiness is based on your appearance, your physical appearance. And for you, that practice and that how you got to the place where you were able to really say, okay, the scale is unrelated to me, Steph, the person, and the human. Because I feel like I know that's still a work in progress for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me personally, this has been a very slow process, I guess I would say. Like it wasn't overnight. And I don't ever want somebody to think that, like, yay, I'm like magically fixed and I never think about these things, because it does show up. And I think that just over time, if you decide to sort of take on this journey of like more self acceptance, especially in terms of body and beauty standards and things like that, then it may decrease in intensity or frequency. But I don't know, as long as we live in a culture, which is a diet culture, where there are beauty and body standards, and there's sort of a hierarchy of body, sizes, and there is discrimination and systematic oppression. Do I think that as long as, these things exist, I think there are going to be pressures that we feel, or real ways in which people have lived experience that is influenced by these things. So I don't want anyone to ever think like, oh, she's just like figured it out and this is a magical unicorn, because this stuff does still come up for me. I was just talking to a friend yesterday and I was like, I'm 44. We're similar in age. And I see sometimes people on Instagram, because I'm not on TikTok really, but like I see on Instagram a lot of times women who are younger than me or my sort of in my peer group. And I'm like, God, their skin looks amazing. Or like, gosh, they hardly have any wrinkles. And then one the other day was talking about going and getting Botox. And I was like, see, like even I'm comparing, I was like, my face is like really like I'm getting a lot of wrinkles. And of course, there are genetics and sun exposure and all sorts of things like that play into it. But I just thought, gosh, like even I know that this stuff exists, and I still like feel down on myself about the fact that, I don't choose to get, I haven't chosen, at least at this point, to get those kind of procedures, which is totally fine. People can do those things if they want. But I'm comparing myself to unknowingly, really, to people that have had these things done. And I just I fall prey to this stuff too. With body stuff, I feel like this is really hard, body image wise, because we're dealing with all of these layers. And again, for me, I had to switch from, or I had to gain this distance from this sporting pursuit that I was doing that highly prized, like being as small as possible. And that was really important for me. And I think that kind of goes along with some of the things that people can do. Again, like this is a systematic problem. So it's like the saying, and one of my great friends, Angie Alt, is like so amazing about this. She's like, like we can't self-care away like all of these things that we're seeing and dealing with. Like we really need community care. Similarly, I don't know how much as individuals it's like, we're going to get tired, right? There's just certain things that we can't necessarily single-handedly change, things like systems of oppression. Um, but I feel like one of the things that people can do is just try to make some distance between themselves and like some of the more easy to remove things in their life, whether it's accounts that you follow on social that you no longer find are supportive to your journey. Those sorts of things is a little bit easier than like removing people in real life, people in your real life circle from your life. That's not always an easy thing to do, but really kind of looking for those lower hanging fruit pieces that people can, I guess, take steps toward. For me, it meant like moving away from this sport. And only recently have I even dabbled in running again. I was doing cycling and triathlon, so I did a lot of running as well. And only now it's 2023, and I stopped doing triathlons in 2010. It's taken me 13 years to really get to the point where I'm like, I think I might want to dabble in some running again, minus all of the crazy, hard, like body image stuff that I was going through at the time. So I do think the scale can be a neutral tool for some people, but I also try to encourage people to start relying on it a little bit less as they're comfortable, um, and looking for other pieces of evidence that support, hey, this is what my health is like. This is what my strength is like. and those sorts of things. Because believe you me, even if you start lifting weights, and this happened to me where I was like really under eating and I was losing my muscle mass because my body was actually consuming my muscle mass to create energy for these ultra distance pursuits that I was doing, which happens when you underfuel chronically. And I started lifting and I happened to like gain muscle quite easily. And I was teaching at the time and I had all these cute blouses, cute, cute like cap sleeve blouses. I guess that was the style back in the early, 2000s, or sort of mid 2000s. And I switched to strength training and I was like, well, now I can't fit into any of these blouses. Like, so that comes up with people sometimes where they're like, I thought this was all going to be just smooth sailing. And I just tried on these pants. I've been doing a lot of squats and like, dang, I'm strong, but now my pants are too small. Like, what the hell?
Hmm.
So this stuff is not a guarantee that it's going to go away just because you've started doing things that you feel like are more supportive to where you want to be. And, I just really encourage people who are struggling with the body image piece to seek out the work of people like Christy King, Body Liberation Project, Beauty Redefined and their work, Brianna Campos and the work that she's doing in terms of body image, and really like learning from a diversity of voices and lived experiences with this stuff because it's not easy, and sort of like recognizing where um, there are gaps potentially. Like for me, even as a coach and as somebody who lives in a straight size body, like I have gaps in my lived experience. Like I don't have the experience of other people who are living in much larger bodies. So I just encourage people to seek out the work of these folks as well, to start working through some of those body image feelings that they're struggling with.
Yeah, well, I loved, that was one of my intentions really, and even having you on, because I felt like this is such an interesting conversation, one that we can't even really cover in the time that we have, but at the same time, one that I feel like I know that I don't address directly all the time, and I'm like happy to be able to do that because it is complex, as a woman, like, or I'm really strong, and then you get older and you hit your 40s and you might gain some weight, and then that's a change, right? And then you have to adjust, or your strength changes. And for me, I'm always constantly trying to come back to like, do I feel good? Am I healthy? Do my
Mhm.
joints hurt or do they not hurt? Right. And
Mhm.
can that be my standard
Yeah.
rather than having the scale be the standard? And yet at the same time, it sort of sits there. And sometimes I'm like, I should probably just toss it because it's like, it tempts me a little to be like, oh, how are you feeling? Or like I'm getting married and then that can come up. And so I feel like it's just this never ending practice. And the scale to me in particular is a big reminder of when we're looking at our worth, because I think sometimes, we think that we are going to get to an arrival destination in general, right? Once we
Mhm.
get there, then we'll know, rather than remembering we're in this constant navigation and
Mhm.
balance for ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us grew up with I mean, went to high school in the 90s if people are similar in age to us or older, and just the messaging around like women's bodies in the media and in magazines, and we have to, have a lot of grace and compassion for ourselves too as we're learning this different approach. We're learning a different way of relating to ourselves, of seeing ourselves in the world, seeing ourselves as inherently valuable no matter what the number on the scale says. And it's just it's really difficult. It takes time. It's I wish it was something that was as easy as flipping a light switch for people, because that would probably feel a lot better when you're really in the throes of just feeling like this is so consuming. But unfortunately we're not at that point, and it just is something that is kind of a moving target, like you said, as we get older too. We age or go through perimenopause, postmenopausal, like our bodies are going to change. We're just seeing that that's happening. And it's like the pressures we felt maybe as if people listening, you've had a child, or you've just seen your body change from college and you're like, oh, this is this like jacket I used to wear in college, and like you try to pull it out and now you're in your mid 40s and you're like, oh, it doesn't fit anymore. We're just like, it's like never ending. And the research that is sort of out there on, we think about like young women and teens and young girls, and certainly these generations of children are even now more susceptible to things like body image issues and eating disorders, disordered eating. Like the incidences are even just climbing from when we kind of came of age and grew up. But that's not where it stops. And there's a lot of research about women in older decades, 60s, 70s, and beyond, and body image struggles. So it's not like it just magically goes away after we're sort of, to use a very biological term, like potentially done mating and trying to attract a mate or have children and those sorts of things. It's like it just doesn't end. And I think that that is one of the things that really hit me hard. I was researching some stuff for a talk that I gave in 2015, and I just came upon that data and I just cried. It just hit me really hard that we go through our lives and we are just such amazing people and doing the contributions that we make, the time spent with family and friends, like experiencing life, and that we just can get to the end of life and just go, well, I don't know if I can swear on the show. I hate my I hate my body so much. I hate I hate this body so deeply, and I just hate the way I look. Like that to me was just such a, I think about my grandma who did all the Weight Watchers and all the things, and I know was really unhappy with her weight. And people always ask me like, where does the eat the full banana come from? And I'm like, because watching my grandmother eat half a banana from Weight Watchers, like that's where I saw that. But I just think of my grandma and I think, gosh, how much I loved her. And this can make me cry, but I just like what I wouldn't give for a day with her, one more day to just spend with her, and to just be in her presence and just enjoy her company. And just like to think that women in particular, although this affects all people, like are feeling like their life was not the best it could be because they didn't look better. It just hits me super hard every time I talk about it and think, we have so much more to give and be and experience and offer the world than looking perfect. And it's just so sad.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Well, because I
Yeah.
think that's the other part about it, because so much of this battle is internal,
Yeah.
right? It has nothing to do with what other people actually experience of you or think of you. And they probably have a completely different perspective on you anyway. And it's so
Yeah.
much this place of like, yeah, this like inner part of you that is hard on yourself and that you took all these lessons. Because yeah, I
Mhm.
feel the same way too. Because like I know people who, like they'll talk about their weight and I love them. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Like,
Mhm.
it doesn't, I love you regardless of what you look like. And it's for us, it's like, how do we start to reprogram ourselves to be like, oh, can we love ourselves that way, the way other people
Yeah.
see us? I mean, I know so many women who like worry about their weight and their partners are like, you're beautiful, like who cares?
Mhm.
And then they still can't do it, and so how do we get back into that place? And I don't know that there's an answer actually. I feel like it's just more this place of exploration. And I appreciate what you share, because saying it and airing it, I know, is what starts to make the shift and the change for people.
Mhm.
And that's
Yeah.
so important. Yeah. Well, I'm curious then, just a slight change of topic. What would you say is your favorite thing about yourself then?
Oh my gosh. Oh, I think I would say my desire to just constantly learn things and insofar as just being really curious about the world. And I think that that's one of the things I guess I feel would be like a great attribute of mine is like being a lifelong learner. And I think somebody recently asked me, what am I doing to keep myself, to like ensure that I'm feeling like a badass when I'm in my 60s or 80s. And I was like, just be a lifelong learner and just being really curious about how things work. And I really like that about myself. I've had to update a lot of things though. That's the other flip side to being somebody who loves to learn is updating your point of view or updating your framework for understanding the world or whatever topic it is that you're learning, just based on what you know, and knowing that like I don't the more I learn, the more I'm like, I don't know anything about any of this. So that to me is constantly fascinating. Um so there's that. And I think the other thing I would say is just um my sort of like desire to just see people where they're at and be, I guess, empathetic to where they're at. A lot of the fitness space is very, you know, toxic in terms of the way it talks to people, and I get it. Like there's a certain amount of like no one can do certain things, some of these things for you. Like I can't actually go lift a weight for you, but understanding when working with people, like real people, where are they coming from? Why have they, experienced sticking points in the past? What are they willing to change? Where are they willing to be curious about their own process and like their own journey through getting stronger, for example. And I just hear there's so much in the fitness space, especially that's just like never miss a Monday and don't be lazy. And I guess I'm trying to be that person in the middle who's kind of like, I get it, like lifting maybe is really intimidating to you. And so what's available to you? Like, can you hire a trainer for a couple sessions and learn your way around the gym? Like, is there a friend you can go with? And so just really trying to meet people where they're at so that they can get to the next step, whatever that is. And as much as that that that's sort of like seeing the nuance in things, and like I think that kind of ties in with that like empathetic piece, is like seeing the nuance is I think my superpower, but it's also really hard to communicate because then people think, oh, you're not strong in your opinions, or like, you don't come out and say things in a very black and white way. So I think I've learned over the years to kind of soften that. And as I've, worked with more people and said like, it's not that they don't want to be strong. Of course, like they do. They're like, I want to feel better. I want to have more energy. I want to be strong. But like, where are they getting stuck? And like, how can we help move them to the next step? And I don't think that that's usually found in these like pithy, like, or like inflammatory, like, don't be lazy, never miss a Monday, personal responsibility. Well, you have to also understand why people are arriving with the experiences and or in the state that they are. And so I feel like that's it's a work in progress for me as a coach, but that is one of the things I think I do pretty well, and is just try to like see see other sides of the story or see the complexities of the issue and try to help people move forward.
Yeah, well, I love that. I know that about you too, just from my experience also living with Steph.
Thanks.
Because it is, a lot of times too, like we did my nutrition and I had to really look at things differently than I'd done before. It was a little bit hard. I was like, I gotta eat some more carbs. Okay. Like it was just a big shift. And I was like, all right. And then taking it on. And I love how you're able to support people to say, okay, like this is the pathway, and then taking them through that step by step.
Mhm.
So let's do this. What would you say is like a tangible tip you could give people who are working on their progress of self-worth in whatever realm you would want to offer to them to start to make a difference there?
Yeah. Ooh, this is hard. But a good question. I feel like identifying, s- identifying for you, what is one thing that you can pay attention to that has like nothing to do with even your numbers, like in the gym, for example. So if we're talking about getting stronger, um, and you're sort of like, okay, I don't want to fall into the trap of substituting like my self worth and how I look for my self worth, and as long as I'm strong, then I'm worthy, right? And so, really, as you're training in the gym, I really love to encourage people to use the concept of auto regulation. But as you're sitting down and maybe you're like writing down like your energy levels for the day, or just like sort of taking stock of how you feel, like how did the workout go, is just identifying for you what is one thing that you can touch upon that has nothing to do with like how much you lifted, or anything like that. So maybe it's like, a technique that you're practicing. I don't know, I'll use like an example of a snatch, like maybe like your to turn over and your snatch felt really smooth today. How do you quantify that? You really can't, but that's kind of part of the whole exercise is just like thinking about something else that you can't easily look back to and compare. And yes, it's helpful to write down, for example, the load that you're using in your lifts. Absolutely. But sometimes we get really fixated on those things. It's like, oh, see, I can't lift as much as I did last week. Like I'm doing terribly. See, I'm not a good human because of it. And that sounds simplistic, but so I would say find something you can like touch base with, in your, maybe it's a technique, a skill, it's just like how you're feeling in a particular area, and just try to be like aware of and observe what that's like for you on that day. and kind of detach a little bit from using numbers, because they can be helpful, but they can also box us in a little bit. I feel like as we're moving along this continuum and sort of like figuring out ways to um, really nurture that inherent sense of self-worth and not allow strength to become a substitute for, oh, I only feel worthy if I feel like I look good today. Well, if it's like I only feel worthy if I hit my 1 rep max today, then we've just kind of switched one for another. So what's something that's hard, it's qualitative, you had to describe it, or something that can't be as easily quantified. I think that that's a worthy exercise or a useful exercise for people as they're looking at that.
Yeah, I love that. Just something small that happened during your workout that's like, you're like, okay, I did that. That was good today, regardless of how it went overall.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, Steph. So now it is time for our rapid fire questions. Are you ready for this? I
I
told her
am.
about
This
it in
is this
advance.
is like payback for every time I did this with other people on my show.
Yes, exactly.
I love it. I love it. I'm ready.
Okay. What was the last thing that you watched on TV?
Um, Love is Blind 4. Yeah.
Awesome.
I love trashy reality TV. What can I say?
I love it. Awesome.
No
Awesome.
spoilers.
No spoilers. What's on your nightstand?
I don't actually have a nightstand, but closest to me is a roll of like paper medical tape that I use to mouth tape at night. That's the closest thing to my pillow.
I'm also a mouth taper. I feel like
Yeah.
everybody should know about this. It's like when you tape your mouth to sleep and you sleep better.
Oh my goodness, it has been a game changer. And not to like divert from your line of questions here, but just to expand on this a little bit. So, um, this has been super important for me, not just from the sleep aspect, but in
Mm.
terms of physical training.
Mm.
I have never in my life been able to run with my mouth closed. And
Oh.
I've been mouth taping for like the last year or so.
Mhm.
And then I started running about 10 weeks ago, and I was like, oh my goodness, I can run with my mouth closed and breathe through my nose now. And it is absolutely because I've been practicing mouth taping at night, and then of course trying to just keep my mouth closed through the rest of the day and nose breathe as much as possible. But
Totally.
it has had a significant impact on training for me.
That's amazing. Well, I
Yeah.
notice when I am mouth breathing still, if I'm like doing something really physical, whereas I feel like before I never paid attention because,
Yeah.
but now you're like, weird, I'm breathing through my mouth.
Mhm.
That's not great. Okay,
Mhm.
awesome. Slight diversion.
Sorry.
It's all good.
Tangent.
Tangent. Okay. When was the last time you tried something new and what was it?
Well, I would say, like new for me entirely or new in a while? Like,
I mean, either, whatever, what comes up for
okay.
you. Yeah.
Um, I would say like doing something new that I haven't done in a long time would be running. So it was like ten weeks ago. I decided I was going to start running again. And then something new, last year I started rucking, which is
Mhm.
essentially carrying weight. And so that's been a really cool addition to my training. Um, I can think of some other things like trying to learn Portuguese. It's another one. And it's not going so well, but I'm trying.
New
So
languages are hard. I've been
yeah.
wrecking because of Steph too. And sometimes I come in for my walks. I'm like, oh, my legs. I feel
Hmm.
it. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. And last one. What are your top three most used emojis on your phone?
Oh, well, let's find out. I think I would definitely say the muscle emoji for sure.
That's great.
Um, So the bicep emoji, usually some kind of heart, and then the other one I use all the time is the melting emoji. Yeah, the
Melting.
dissolving emoji that I use for everything like that. I feel like is is just annoying, or like, oh, so tired of this. So yeah, I would say those are my top three, like
Hilarious.
strength, love, and a little bit of what the heck.
Awesome. Well, Steph, where can people reach you and find out more about what you do?
Yeah, they can find me on my website, which is stephgaudreau.com, the Fuel Your Strength podcast on major podcast platforms, and also now on YouTube. And probably the other good place would be on Instagram, which is Steph_Gaudreau.
Yes, and we'll be linking all of those in the notes as well. Steph,
Cool.
what a joy to have you and have this conversation. I love what you share and what you teach. It's been really
Thanks.
inspirational for me. And so it's a total honor to have you here and sharing your wisdom here with us today.
Well, thanks for asking me on the show, and I loved your questions, and it was really great to chat with you.
So thank you.